Robel, let me begin with you and clear up, I guess, a potential misunderstanding. When Fano forces fought with the government against Tigrayan rebels, it was not because the Amhara were necessarily pro-government, but because they had an enemy in common. Is that not correct?
Yes, Andrea. Essentially, the war in northern Ethiopia implicated the Amhara forces because they were fighting in self-defense. They were invaded by several forces, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army. And as you know, this actually lasted for over 2 years, since November 2020. Unfortunately, a lot of crimes were committed, and war crimes included, within the Amhara and Afar regions. So as this was happening, there was this misconception that Amhara supported Abiy, but that is absolutely unfounded because the Amhara region actually had the largest anti-government protests, including the ones that led to the current round of fighting in the Amhara region. For example, earlier this year, in April 2023, protesters came to the streets and led peaceful civil demonstrations across more than 30 cities and towns in the Amhara region, voicing their discontent with the Abiy regime's policies, including decades of genocide committed against the Amhara people, including in the Oromia region of the country. And so this was just one of the issues. There was also political marginalization, subjugation, arrests of political prisoners. These include opposition figures, journalists, professors, students, and sometimes human rights activists and people who are simply profiled for being Amhara. So the reason for the current fighting, I think, shows that, or the current fighting shows that these forces were not allied to the Abiy regime, and they do not see the Abiy government as a legitimate government. And we can even look back to the Pretoria deal, which ended the war in northern Ethiopia, in which Amharas called for independent representation to promote justice and accountability and to look after their interests because they did not trust the Abiy government to do that for them.
And they were not really included in the Pretoria Agreement, so they seem to feel that they were kind of thrown under the bus in that process by not being really able to participate. So help us understand then how much you think the Fano forces now really represent all Amharan people. Are they united around the cause that the Fano are now going to battle for?
Certainly, the Fano, when we talk about the Fano, it's important to understand these are everyday men and women who have taken up private arms. These are their own private arms, oftentimes very outdated rifles, for the self-defense of their communities. And this is a cultural practice by the Amhara people that dates back many centuries, including from the time of the Second World War, when Ethiopia was actually invaded by fascist Italy. And so the Fano took up arms to defend their homes. And this is what we're seeing currently as the Abiy regime has waged a genocidal war on the Amhara region. And this is waged on for many months now. But what's interesting is that the Fano are actually seen as the only reliable mechanism to look after the safety and protection of the Amhara people. They do not trust federal forces to do this for them, as over the past 5 to 6 years, the federal forces have not only failed to protect Amharas throughout the country, but have actually been complicit in the human rights violations against them. So the Fano are essentially seen as freedom fighters, not as just your regular type of militia group that is how they're somehow portrayed to be at times.
Let me turn to Gebre Christos, because the
Ethiopia forward.
Yeah, let me get Robel's sentiments on that. I mean, is part of the problem here that nobody wants to let go of the history, including Amhara, to make a fresh start that Ladet would argue Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is trying to bring in order to unify one entire nation. But if you can't let go of your history and you're going to continue to remain with old grievances and insist that land be re-given, refought for according to where it was before, there will never be a solution.
Thank you, Andrea. I think in the current discussion, it's important to realize what is happening right now in the Amhara region, and that's a siege imposed by the Abiy regime that's lasted over 4.5 months. And Abiy represents the Oromo Prosperity Party. And so this is a new hegemonic power that has dominated Ethiopia in an ethnic-based rule for the last 5 to 6 years now. And so you have deployment of tens of thousands of soldiers, use of tanks, drones, and heavy artillery weapons on civilian targets, which have resulted in thousands of casualties. And we've actually seen in recent weeks door-to-door civilian massacres in major cities in the Amhara region, including Gondar, Bahar Dar, and Shoa Robit. We've seen weaponized rape against young girls and women, property destruction, withholding of supplies from farmers, intentional destruction of cultural heritage sites, including UNESCO sites such as the Fasil Gibbi castles in the Gondar city, and involvement of non-ENDF forces. So you have deployment of also Oromia regional forces. The Tigray People's Liberation Front has seen this as an opportunity to invade in certain areas and collude with the ENDF, and a similar case with the Oromo Liberation Army. And this was on top of mass arrests, as I mentioned before, tens of thousands of people being profiled and abducted from the streets, put in concentration camps, and subjected to torture. And this was on top of ethnic cleansing in Shaggar, and earlier this year, Christian Muslim worshippers being shot. So what Abiy is promoting in Ethiopia is not democracy. There's never been any democracy in the Oromia region. He ran unchallenged. So there was no political opposition. We've seen actually arrests of members of parliament despite their immunity. So this country is once again seeing what it saw under 27 years of dictatorship by the TPLF, by Meles Zenawi. And when we look at why Amharas are fighting, it's a direct result of decades of genocide, subjugation, and political marginalization by consecutive regimes from Abiy's Oromo Prosperity Party, previously the TPLF under Meles, and then the communist Derg before that. So we're talking about decades of oppression, and that's what led to first peaceful demonstrations, and then the fighting.
Yeah, and with this, we have 45 seconds. You still think the international community can somehow change this equation and help bring peace? How so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The international community has lots of leverage to pressure the Abiy regime in this situation. And what they can do is pressure him to call for the immediate withdrawal of non-Amhara forces, the unconditional release of political prisoners, and then revisiting the Pretoria deal, which failed to deliver justice for millions of people impacted by the war. And to achieve peace, we need to actually break the cycle of impunity, that we've seen over the last few years in Ethiopia by the Oromo Prosperity Party and previously by the TPLF. And what's clear is that Abiy Ahmed cannot achieve peace and stability in Ethiopia. He does not have the capabilities to lead. He has very narcissistic tendencies. He looks after the interest of his own elites in his cabal. And I think it's very important to understand that the Amhara resistance is first and foremost about self-preservation, and is actually a struggle for democracy and basic human dignity.
Yeah, we're going to have to end it there, Robel, unfortunately. This